So earlier we talked about the different silos of knowledge, the five silos of knowledge we're going to talk about in ways that you can improve. Like number one, uh, the fundamentals. I feel like I've got a really good understanding of the fundamentals of photography. I can solve most vexing photographic problems when I'm in the field without having to think about it too much. It's muscle memory. But the second one, I will concede that maybe my silo is only half full is when it comes to post-production. I will concede, not that it's a competition, and I don't mind conceding. I will gladly concede that there's a whole lot of people that are better at post-processing than I am. My philosophy has always been try to get it right in the camera, do as least post-processing as you can to try to get it where it's ready. And so that's still how I think about things. Part of that mentality comes from I used to shoot film and you had to get it right in the camera. Secondarily, I shoot a lot of pictures every year, and that's just a lot of post processing that would bog me down if I really wanted to spend a lot of time on each picture. So I do. I try to get it right as much as I can, and then have my set of tools in my toolbox, so to speak, that I can tweak the images that I want to and not spend an excessive amount of time on each image. And that's just how I think about things. And so because I think that way, there's a whole lot of things on post processing that probably I don't do as good as I should. But the one thing we're going to talk about too, if you have a good post-production workflow and you've got that committed to memory, it's going to help you solve a lot of problems when you're in the field. So in other words, you take a picture and if there's some problems with it in the field, you just instantly know, okay, if I do this in post-processing, I'll be able to correct that. Let me go backwards right quick for you. This this picture right here of the flowers in Death Valley. When I shot that picture, I had a couple of decisions to make because number one, the flowers in the rock were already in the shade. The mountains, as you can see in the background, were in the sun, and so you can either expose for the light or expose for the shadow. And so cameras are getting better at this dynamic range, but this had a little bit of a dynamic range to it. If I expose for the flowers, the mountains would blow out. If I expose for the mountains, then the flowers would be really dark. And so I had a decision to make. And my decision was pretty simple. I knew because of my post-processing workflow and the tools I had in my toolbox that I could go in and lay a graduated, a linear, what do they call it in Lightroom? A graduated neutral density filter is what I call it, but just a linear gradient is what they call it. Linear gradient filter. I could lay that linear gradient in there and then darken just that area of the sky that I need to darken to make the whole exposure match. I knew I had that in my toolbox, and so I took the picture the best way I thought I could. It didn't look as good in the camera, but I knew when I got it back in post-processing, I could shine that baby and make it look a lot better. Let me get back to my slides here. It's easy to go backwards on these things, but it's a little slower to go forward. Okay, if you have a good post-production workflow, it's really your secret sauce to knowing what's possible in the field. There's sometimes when no matter how hard you try, there's not much you can do to make a good picture in the field. Good example of that is let's say you see a black bear and it's standing timber and it's 12 o'clock in the afternoon on a bright sunny day. There's not a whole lot you can do to make that a good picture. It's because of the dappled light and all the other things going on. But there's times like I showed you on the flower picture, if you've got the mountains in the sun and the foreground's in the shade, you can expose for the shade. The mountains are going to be a little bit blown out, but you've got the tools to be able to fix that in post-processing. And so that's what I advocate. Even on this picture here of this bald eagle when we're in Yellowstone, if it was really early in the morning, the light wasn't great, the sun hadn't peaked the mountains yet, it was really dark. So when I first saw it, it had a really snowy background behind it. And so one of the things I try to coach people on is if you've got a really bright background behind a bird that's in a tree, try to reposition yourself where you've got some color behind it. And that's what I did here. So I just repositioned myself where it's a drab color, but it's not just stark white. And so I shot the picture and I went ahead and shot it at a pretty high ISO, like, I don't know, 6,000 or something like that. And I knew it was going to be noisy, but I knew in my toolbox back at home, I would have the tools to be able to denoise it and make it look decent in the end. And so that's what I did here. So that was the tool in the toolbox. So here's my primary workflow when it comes to Lightroom. Once I get images into Lightroom Develop, into the Develop module, I use auto to give me a starting point. The auto develop, and it is. Lightroom is getting so good. And I use Lightroom because that's what most people use. So I think I know how to use some other software solutions as well. And they'll pretty much all do this, but Lightroom is the standard, I think, which most people go by. But Lightroom is a really good place it gives I mean, using auto in Lightroom gives you a really good place to start. It'll give Lightroom's opinion about where it thinks it ought to be. And so what I'll do is hit auto first, and then secondarily, I'll go back in and make any adjustments I need to. So I use it as a starting point. Most adjustments I make, and this is anecdotal, I've never measured this, but just thinking about what I usually have to do. If Lightroom gets anything askew, it's usually the exposure, and I have to go back and adjust the exposure because Lightroom doesn't know that you're taking pictures of snow. It doesn't know you're purposely trying to overexpose an image because of the snow. It doesn't know you're purposely trying to underexpose an image because if it's got a dark background like these pelican you saw a while ago. And so it doesn't know. And so a lot of times you have to adjust that. And then after I do the exposure adjustment, if needed, I look at the blacks, the shadows, the whites, or the highlights, just all the basic stuff in that one menu, and I adjust it where it's needed. Most of the time, that's usually pretty good. Again, it gives me a good starting point. I'm trying to be a really sort of realistic look at my pictures and really sort of I don't really go I try not to go all out and doing some funky colors or funky finishes. It's just pretty much a faithful representation of what I saw in the field. And I don't I'm not and I'm not slamming anybody that does, so don't take this as a veiled insult at anybody, but I'm not chasing Facebook likes or Instagram likes or anything like that. So I'm not trying to really kind of play that game, the oversaturated game that you need to on some of those platforms. My mind is still like working with magazines. You give a pretty faithful representation. It's like truth in advertising. You give a pretty faithful representation. And if they want to do any more color correction, then they take care of that themselves. I just try to present it as close as it was the way I saw it in the field. And so uh, once I'm done with my primary workflow, my secondary workflow, after I do all those basic adjustments, then I start thinking about the tools in my toolbox. Do I need to use a graduated ND filter or a linear gradient? I misnamed that on this one. Or do I need to use a linear gradient to add a little pop of color to the top of the sky where it may be overexposed or bring the exposure down a little bit? Do I need to use a radial gradient like in the case of, I didn't use it on this one, but like in the case of that windmill, if I wanted to brighten those blades up a little bit, I could have dropped a radial gradient in there. One of the things too that radial gradient works great at is if you've taken a picture of wildlife and their eyes a little dark, put those radial gradients on each eye, adjust the exposure up a little bit, give a little pop and a little shine to the eye. Makes a huge, huge difference. So I consider using that. Notice I say consider because I don't always use them. Then I'll consider any kind of remove tools, like is there a highline wire or anything else that's distracting that I need to take out. Again, I try to avoid those things as much as I can in the field, but I realize sometimes you can't avoid them. So do I need to do any of that? And then usually do I need to use denoise or any kind of lens correction tools in Lightroom to fix it? It's really those are the basic things I do. And as I keep those in my mind when I'm in the field, it helps me solve those problems. If I'd have shot this picture and if I would expose for the moon on this one, but if I'd exposed for the windmill, the moon would have been blown out. Well, I just knew I could go back and use a brush filter to be able to go over the moon and make that moon the exposure it ought to be. I just knew I could do that. And when you have that knowledge when you're in the field, then it really does make the problem solving aspect a lot easier because if you take it one way, you can go solve that problem when you get home. And I think that's the way that the technology is meant to be married to each other is you do the best you can in the field and then you just sweeten it up when you get back home in post processing. And so here's a practice protocol for how you can conquer number two. Early on, I used to not make a note on my phone. I used to make notes on note cards and leave them in my camera bag to help me remember all these things I need to do. This was before smartphone in the early days of digital, and in the latter days of film, I did the same thing. But when digital started, I would make a note on my phone to remember all those post-processing protocols we can do as a field reminder. Now it's even better because we have more protocols that we can do. There's more things that we can do in an image to help bring it back or to make it like we saw it in the field. And so And so when I would make the handwritten notes, it was before we had smartphones, but now we have smartphones. You can put those notes on your phone and be able to find them in an instance. Just as a reminder, at some point, if you refer to your notes enough, you're just going to remember what you can do, and it becomes muscle memory at that point. And then again, refer to it when you're in the field to help you guide you on any kind of problem solving that you ought to do.